Hey y'all, welcome back as we continue through our journey cover to cover through the Bible, page by page, verse by verse. We are on Genesis chapter 30. And in chapter 30, we see that God even uses the wrong focus to point everyone to Jesus. Rachel and Leah are focusing on each other and the race to have kids rather than focusing on God and his plan. The children born in this situation will become the 12 tribes of Israel, and God will use each of these 12 in multiple ways to bring forth his plan and his message of salvation for the entire world. God forgives, God restores, and God redeems our messes. He is so faithful. And we'll go ahead and start with verse 1 of chapter 30. When Rachel saw that she wasn't having any children for Jacob, she became jealous of her sister. She pleaded with Jacob, "Give me children or I will die." Then Jacob became furious with Rachel. "Am I God?" he asked. "He is the one who has kept you from having children." So Leah has had four boys at this point, and Rachel is barren. And she is focusing all of her energy on the yoke of jealousy, which is strangling her, instead of God, which would set her free, and just being in peace, knowing that God is in control and trusting in God. In Titus 3:3, it says, "Once we too were foolish and disobedient. We were misled and became slaves to many lusts and pleasures. Our lives were full of evil and envy, and we hated each other." That is not how we live in Christ and how we give God's glory to the world around us. That is not what God calls us to be or live like. She's being dramatic in this. She's also being prophetic, though, because she will die giving birth to her second son, Benjamin. Leah and Rachel have their eyes on each other, not on God. Rachel is struggling to have children, and Leah is struggling for her husband's affection. They're both struggling, but they're not reaching out to God. And your spouse is not God. She calls out her spouse, and he's like, "I'm not God. Call out to God." In verse 3, we'll continue. Then Rachel told him, "Take my maid Bilhah and sleep with her. She will bear children for me, and through her I can have a family too." So Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a wife, and he slept with her. Bilhah became pregnant and presented him with a son. Rachel named him Dan, for she said, "God has vindicated me. He has heard my request and given me a son." Then Bilhah became pregnant again and gave Jacob a second son. Rachel named him Naphtali, for she said, "I have struggled hard with my sister and I'm winning." Oh boy. So here we have a surrogate situation similar to Sarah and Hagar, and a third wife for Jacob. Dan and Naphtali are born through Bilhah. Samson actually comes from the tribe of Dan. And Jesus is going to begin his ministry in the region of Naphtali and Zebulun in Matthew 4:13 through 14. We see that. He went first to Nazareth, then left there and moved to Capernaum, beside the Sea of Galilee in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. So that is actually where he started his ministry. This is a battle between the sisters that is driven by envy and jealousy, and it is choking them. They are not breaking free from the yoke. And no one wins in that kind of battle. She says, "I'm winning," but no, she is not. Nobody wins in a battle of jealousy. In verse 9, meanwhile, Leah realized that she wasn't getting pregnant anymore. So she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Soon Zilpah presented him with a son. Leah named him Gad, for she said, "How fortunate I am." And then Zilpah gave Jacob a second son, and Leah named him Asher, for she said, "What joy is mine! Now the other women will celebrate with me." So now Jacob has a fourth wife motivated by temporary barrenness, and child 7 and 8 are born, Gad and Asher. The prophetess actually in Luke 2:36 was from the tribe of Asher. Anna, a prophet, was also there in the temple. She was the daughter of Phanuel from the tribe of Asher. So this was the prophet that got to see Jesus and prophesies that the child was filled with wisdom and God's favor was on him, and that he was the child of God. And she was from the tribe of Asher. In verse 14, we will continue. One day during the wheat harvest, Reuben found some mandrakes growing in a field, and he brought them to his mother, Leah. Rachel begged Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But Leah angrily replied, "Wasn't it enough that you stole my husband, and now you want to steal my son's mandrakes too?" And Rachel answered, "I will let Jacob sleep with you tonight if you give me some of the mandrakes." So that evening, as Jacob was coming home from the fields, Leah went out to meet him. "You must come and sleep with me tonight," she said. "I have paid for you with some mandrakes that my son found." So that night he slept with Leah. All right, y'all. This gets crazier. So now we have the Battle of the Mandrakes. Mandrakes were a fruit, and they were believed to help barren women conceive. The Hebrew word for mandrake is dudaim, which means love plants. And now they're trusting in fruit and turning to mandrakes instead of turning to God. And Jacob is being sold between the two wives, not two wives, he has 4 wives, but he's being sold between Leah and Rachel for mandrakes. And they're all so work-minded and work-focused instead of faith-focused. As Jacob worked for years for these women, and now they're trading fruit for him. Rachel and Leah both seem to be treating Jacob like a servant, and they use him as a pawn in their family bargaining and their competitions. God brings forth life, not mandrakes. Nothing else can bring forth life, only God. And they're using him, and Jacob does what they say. He's just a pawn in their hands. But if you think about it, Jacob lived for years doing what his mother told him to do. His mother told him to deceive. He went along with it. He could have stopped that and said, "No, how about we talk instead?" But he goes along with it. Whatever the women in his life tell him to do, he just seems to go along with it. And we'll continue in verse 17. And God answered Leah's prayers. God did, not the mandrakes. She became pregnant again and gave birth to a 5th son for Jacob. She named him Issachar, for she said, "God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband as a wife." Then Leah became pregnant again and gave birth to a 6th son for Jacob. She named him Zebulun, for she said, "God has given me a good reward. Now my husband will treat me with respect, for I have given him 6 sons. Later she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel's plight and answered her prayers by enabling her to have children. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. "God has removed my disgrace," she said, and she named him Joseph, for she said, "May the Lord add yet another son to my family." So Issachar and Zebulun are born, which is a 5th and 6th son for Leah, but the 9th and 10th son for Jacob. And among 10 brothers, a girl is finally born, and we have Dinah. God still has a plan for Rachel. And remember, the word remember is actually zakar. It doesn't mean he forgot about Rachel. It just means that it was time for God's plans for Rachel to come forth. The time had arrived, and it brings forth Joseph. Joseph is born, Rachel's 1st and Jacob's 11th son. Joseph is actually not on the map of the 12 tribes of Israel because he ended up actually receiving a double portion through his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, who are both on the map of the land division for Israel. His name means God will add, and God was with Joseph, and he did add to his life greatly. Through Joseph, God would save the entire family as well as several other people on earth through a terrible, terrible famine that we're going to read about in the future chapters. And then we're going to look at verse 25. Soon after Rachel had given birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Please release me so I can go home to my own country. Let me take my wives and children, for I have earned them by serving you, and let me be on my way. You certainly know how hard I have worked for you." So the 14 years are up, and he's like, I want to go home now. In verse 27, "Please listen to me," Laban replied. "I have become wealthy, for the Lord has blessed me because of you. Tell me how much I owe you. Whatever it is, I'll pay it." Jacob replied, "You know how hard I've worked for you and how your flocks and herds have grown under my care. You had little indeed before I came, but your wealth has increased enormously. The Lord has blessed you through everything that I have done. But now what about me? When can I start providing for my own family?" "What wages do you want?" Laban asked again. Jacob replied, "Don't give me anything. Just do this one thing and I'll continue to tend and watch over your flocks." So Jacob is ready to go, and Laban wants to keep him. His 14 years are up, but Laban doesn't want him to leave because he's receiving blessing after blessing after blessing because of God's hand on Jacob's life. But Jacob wants to take his huge, huge family and go home and be on his own and start his own life with his new family. He now has 11 sons and 1 daughter and 4 wives, and he has fulfilled his part of the deal with Laban. His deal is complete. The 14 years are complete. Laban doesn't want to lose Jacob because he knows that he's been blessed greatly because of God's hand and favor on Jacob's life. So in return, he says, no. Tell me your wage. I'll pay you if you stay. Please stay. Tell me what I owe you. Tell me what you want me to do. Because he wants Jacob to stay. And Jacob's like, no, I just want to go home. I want to go back to the promised land. And we'll continue with that. In verse 32, "Let me inspect your flocks today." This is Jacob talking. "Let me inspect your flocks today and remove all the sheep and goats that are speckled or spotted, along with all the black sheep. Give these to me as my wages. In the future, when you check on the animals you have given me as my wages, you'll see that I have been honest. If you find in my flock any goats without speckles or spots, or any sheep that are not black, you will know that I have stolen them from you." "All right," Laban replied, "it will be as you say." But that very day, Laban went out and removed the male goats that were streaked and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted or had white patches, and all the black sheep. He placed them in the care of his own sons, who took them a 3 days' journey from where Jacob was. Meanwhile, Jacob stayed and cared for the rest of Laban's flock. So Laban takes the spotted and speckled and black ones, and he takes them on a 3 days journey away, so they're completely separated. Then Jacob took some fresh branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and peeled off strips of bark, marking white streaks on them. Then he placed these peeled branches in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, for that was where they mated. And when they mated in front of the white streaked branches, they gave birth to young that were streaked, speckled, and spotted. Jacob separated those lambs from Laban's flocks, and at mating time he turned the flock to face Laban's animals that were streaked or black. This is how he built his own flock instead of increasing Laban's. Whenever the stronger females were ready to mate, Jacob would place the peeled branches in the watering troughs in front of them, and then they would mate in front of the branches. But he didn't do this with the weaker ones. So the weaker lambs belonged to Laban, and the stronger ones were Jacob's. As a result, Jacob became very wealthy with large flocks of sheep and goats, female and male servants, and many camels and donkeys. All right, so this duel begins between two master tricksters. Jacob fears God now, though, and he's trying to be honest. All Jacob wants for his wages was to build his own flock of sheep and goats from the speckled and spotted ones out of Laban's flock. These were the ones that were considered inferior anyways. They would be separated out. Laban takes all the speckled ones to start with, all the ones that were inferior. He takes them on a 3-day journey so that they'd be separated. And Laban had the right to investigate at any time. So these two tricksters had obvious trust issues with each other. Obvious trust issues. Jacob's peeled sticks, they're useless. They're in the same category as the mandrakes. It wasn't the peeled sticks that were giving Jacob spotted, speckled, and black sheep. It was God. It had nothing to do with God. The peeled sticks had nothing to do with God, what God himself was doing for Jacob and the blessing that God had on Jacob's life. God blessed him, not the sticks. God promised to bless him, and he's keeping his promise to him. Laban agreed to the terms, so the results of the breeding are out of his hand. He agreed to this. The spotted and speckled ones would all be Jacob's. Jacob became wealthy because of his faith in God and God's blessings, not because of the sticks. When he arrived 20 years ago, all he had was a staff in his hand. He had worked hard, suffered a good bit, and trusted God through it. And now he had a huge family and a bunch of flocks of goats, sheep, camels, and donkeys, as well as servants to care for them all. God had indeed blessed him, just as he promised he would. God is faithful. God is trustworthy. God's promises are true and eternal. We can have faith in God. We can trust God. We can know that God is with us. We can rely on God. We can lean on God. We can be honest with God. And we know that God is blessing the family. I don't know if y'all can see this. Hold on just a sec. Okay, so just that is an outline, a little graph of the children. Benjamin, the 12th son, is not born yet. But that's how all these 11 sons and one daughter have come forth and who they came forth through. And God is blessing Jacob. God promised to bless Jacob, and God is blessing Jacob and his life. God is speaking to Jacob's heart about going back home, going back to the promised land. God promised him the land that he needs to go back to, and God is going to bring it forth, but he's going to bless Jacob as he does, as he faithfully leans into God, and his character and integrity changes, and his heart changes as he encounters God and faithfully trusts God. He will be blessed by God continually. God promised to bless him, and God is blessing him. And God promises to pour out blessings in our lives if we trust him, lean on him, and let him guide every single one of our days. Again, he doesn't say that life will be easy. Life on earth is not easy because this is not heaven. This is not our eternal home. We are exiles in a foreign land. But this is temporary, and God will hold us through it. We can trust him. We can let him guide us. We can let him lead us. We can let his glory shine through us to those around us so that they too can join in the kingdom of God for all eternity. If we don't look different and set apart than everyone else around us, why would anyone want what we have? What we have in God is priceless. It's eternal. It is amazing, and it is wonderful, and it needs to be shared with the world around us. And just like God blesses Jacob in his life, God also blesses our lives. He has a plan and a purpose and a destiny for each of us, and we can trust him and let him lead us and guide us right to it. Thanks, y'all. I hope you're having a great day.